The bright morning sun shone through the large windows of Atlanta International Airport as 14-year-old twins Darnell and Darius Johnson walked confidently toward Gate B-17. Their matching blue backpacks bounced lightly against their shoulders. The twins were excited about their trip to Chicago to visit their grandmother Elaine for spring break. This would be their first time flying alone, and they had spent weeks looking forward to the independence. "Do you think Grandma will have made her famous sweet potato pie?" Darius asked, the quieter and more thoughtful of the twins. Darnell grinned. "She better. She promised in her last phone call." He pulled out his phone to check the time. "We're early. That should make Dad happy." Their father, Marcus Johnson, had dropped them off at the security checkpoint an hour earlier, giving them one last review of travel tips before heading to an important business meeting. As the CEO of Skyline Media, one of the largest advertising companies in the country, Marcus was a stickler for punctuality and preparation. "Remember, keep your boarding passes and IDs handy, stay together at all times, and call me when you land," he had told them, straightening Darius's collar. Though he tried to look serious, the pride in his eyes was obvious. His boys were growing up. The terminal was busy with the usual morning rush of business travelers and families. The twins found seats near their gate and settled in to wait, occasionally glancing at the large screen displaying flight information. Their flight to Chicago was on time, scheduled to depart in 45 minutes. "Flight 372 to Chicago will begin boarding in 15 minutes, a voice announced over the speaker system. "We'll start with our premium members and passengers who need extra assistance." Darnell and Darius gathered their belongings and moved closer to the boarding area. They watched as the first passengers began to board, tickets in hand. A few minutes later, the gate agent called for Zone 1. "That's us," Darnell said, checking their boarding passes once more. The twins got in line behind a middle-aged couple and a businessman talking loudly on his phone. When they reached the front of the line, they handed their boarding passes and ID cards to the gate agent, a woman with short blonde hair and a tight smile. Her name tag read Karen White. Karen looked at their passes, then at the twins, her smile fading. "How old are you boys?" she asked, her tone suddenly sharp. 14, Darnell answered. "We're twins." Karen shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we can't allow unaccompanied minors on this flight." The twins exchanged confused glances. Darnell spoke up first. "But we booked these tickets weeks ago. There wasn't anything about needing an adult." Karen barely looked at them as she continued checking in the next passenger. "You need to step aside, please. Company policy states you must be at least 16 to fly alone." Darius, usually content to let his brother do the talking, felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. "But our dad checked all the rules before buying our tickets. He said it was fine." "Well, he was mistaken," Karen replied dismissively. "You'll need to speak with customer service about rebooking or getting a refund." The twins reluctantly moved to the side of the line, watching as other passengers continued to board. Darnell pulled out his phone to show their confirmation emails. "Look, it says right here we're confirmed for this flight. There's nothing about an age restriction." Karen barely glanced at the phone. "I don't make the rules. You need to be at least 16 to fly alone on our airline." As more passengers filed past them onto the plane, Darius noticed something that made his heart sink. A group of white teenagers, clearly no older than they were, approached the gate. They were laughing and joking loudly, no adults in sight. Darius nudged his brother and nodded in their direction. The same gate agent who had just turned them away checked the teenagers' boarding passes with a warm smile. "Enjoy your flight," she said cheerfully as the group moved down the jetway. Darnell's confusion quickly turned to anger. "Excuse me," he called to Karen. "Those kids aren't any older than us. Why are they allowed to board?" Karen's face hardened. "They're traveling as a school group, which is different." "But they don't have any teachers with them," Darius pointed out quietly. "I've explained our policy," Karen said firmly. "If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to call security." The twins asked to speak to a supervisor, who arrived promptly but only reinforced Karen's position. The supervisor, a tall man named Bill Peterson, spoke to them with clear condescension. "Boys, I understand you're disappointed, but sometimes Exceptions are made based on various factors, Bill explained vaguely, not meeting their eyes. Not today, though. Rules are rules. What factors? Darnell pressed, his voice rising slightly. Those other kids are our age. The only difference is... He stopped himself, suddenly understanding with painful clarity. The difference is what? Bill asked, his tone challenging. Darius put a hand on his brother's arm. Nothing, he said quietly. We understand. As the final boarding call sounded, the twins stepped aside, watching their flight leave without them. The excitement they had felt earlier had been replaced by a hollow feeling in their chests. They found seats in a quiet corner of the waiting area. Darnell's hands were shaking with frustration as he pulled out his phone. I'm calling Dad. Darius nodded, his usual quiet demeanor masking the hurt he felt. This wasn't the first time they had experienced unfair treatment, but it never got easier. Marcus Johnson picked up on the second ring. Hey boys, did you board already? Dad, Darnell said, his voice breaking slightly. They wouldn't let us on the plane. What? Why not? Marcus's voice immediately shifted from cheerful to concerned. They said we're too young to fly alone, Darnell explained, struggling to keep his voice steady. They said we have to be 16. That's ridiculous, Marcus replied. I checked all the policies before buying your tickets. The minimum age is 12 for domestic flights. We know, Darius said, taking the phone from his brother. But that's not all, Dad. They let other kids our age board. White kids. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was controlled but tense. Tell me exactly what happened. Everything. The twins took turns explaining the situation, describing how Karen had refused them without checking any policies, how the supervisor had mentioned exceptions without explanation, and how the group of white teenagers had boarded without issue. Marcus listened carefully, asking pointed questions about what exactly had transpired. As the twins described the differential treatment they'd observed, his voice grew increasingly firm. Put me on speaker, he instructed. When the twins complied, he continued. I want you to go back to the gate. Find that same agent who refused you. The twins made their way back to gate B-17, where Karen was now checking in passengers for another flight. She looked up with annoyance when she saw them approach. Hello, this is Marcus Johnson, father of Darnell and Darius, came their father's clear voice through the phone speaker. Could you please explain to me why my sons aren't being allowed to board when other minors their age are? Karen's expression changed instantly upon hearing Marcus identify himself. Her eyes darted to the phone, then back to the twins. She stammered that she was just following protocol, but offered no explanation for the inconsistency. I'd like to speak with your station manager immediately, Marcus stated, his tone leaving no room for refusal. Karen hesitated, then picked up her phone. The twins exchanged glances, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Their father had always taught them to stand up for themselves, but he had also taught them that sometimes fighting unfairness required more than just speaking up. It required leverage. And as they would soon learn, Marcus Johnson had plenty of that. Karen's hands shook slightly as she made the call to the station manager. The twins stood quietly by the counter, their father still on speakerphone. Other passengers waiting to board the next flight watched with curious expressions, some pretending not to stare while others made no effort to hide their interest. The station manager will be here in a few minutes, Karen said, her formerly confident tone now uncertain. She avoided looking directly at the twins. Thank you, Marcus replied through the phone. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. Boys, I want you to wait right there. Don't go anywhere. Yes, Dad, they answered in unison. While they waited, Darnell's phone buzzed with a text from their grandmother in Chicago. Are you boys on the plane yet? Can't wait to see you. Darnell showed the message to Darius, who sighed. I hope we still get to go, Darius whispered. 15 minutes passed before a tall man in a crisp navy suit approached the gate. His name tag identified him as Greg Thompson, station manager. He walked directly to where the twins stood. You must be Darnell and Darius, he said, extending his hand to each boy in turn. His smile seemed genuine, unlike Karen's earlier forced expression. I understand there's been some confusion about your flight today. Our dad's on the phone, Darnell said, holding up his cell. Greg nodded. Mr. Johnson, this is Greg Thompson, station manager for Atlanta International. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding today. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Marcus replied, his voice still measured but firm. My sons were denied boarding while other children their age were allowed on the same flight. I'd like to understand why. Greg's professional smile faltered. May I speak with you privately for a moment, Mr. Johnson? You may speak with me and my sons together, Marcus insisted. They deserve to hear any explanation you have to offer. Greg looked uncomfortable but nodded. Of course. Our policy for unaccompanied minors is that children between 12 and 15 can fly alone on direct flights. I'm not sure why your sons were given different information. Karen, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. I thought the policy changed last month, she said weakly. Greg's expression hardened. No policy change has been implemented, and even if there had been, we would never apply new restrictions to passengers with existing bookings. He turned back to the phone. Mr. Johnson, I can assure you this is not how we typically operate. I'd like to personally escort your sons to our VIP lounge where they can wait for the next flight to Chicago, which leaves in 3 hours. Of course, we'll upgrade them to first class at no additional charge. There was a pause on the line. The twins could almost picture their father sitting at his desk, one hand rubbing his temple the way he did when he was thinking carefully. That's a start, Marcus finally said. But I want to be clear. This incident is far from resolved. My sons observed other minors their age being allowed to board without question. The only visible difference was the color of their skin. Greg's face paled slightly. I understand your concern, Mr. Johnson. I assure you we do not tolerate discrimination of any kind. We'll be conducting a full investigation into what happened today. I'll expect a call from your CEO by the end of the business day, Marcus stated. It wasn't a request. Greg blinked in surprise. I'm not sure that's... Greg, Marcus interrupted. You may not recognize my name, but Patricia Miller certainly will. Skyline Media handles a significant portion of your airline's advertising budget. I'd prefer not to mix business with personal matters, but when my children are treated unfairly, all options are on the table. The station manager's expression changed as recognition dawned. He straightened his tie nervously. Of course, Mr. Johnson, I'll personally ensure that Patricia calls you today. Thank you. Now please take good care of my sons. Marcus's voice softened as he addressed the twins. Boys, I'm sorry this happened. I'm proud of how you handled yourselves. Call me from the lounge, okay? Okay, Dad, Darnell replied. Thanks. After ending the call, Greg led the twins away from the gate. As they walked, Darius glanced back to see Karen being approached by another airline employee in a management uniform. Her face was tense, and she kept shaking her head as if denying something. The VIP lounge was nothing like the crowded general waiting area. Soft leather chairs, a buffet of snacks, and large windows overlooking the runway made it feel more like a hotel than an airport. A smiling attendant named Lisa showed them to a private seating area. Can I get you boys anything? Soda? Snacks? She asked kindly. Coke for me, please, Darnell said. Same, added Darius. When Lisa left to get their drinks, Darius turned to his brother. Did you know Dad's company did advertising for the airline? Darnell shook his head. No, but I'm not surprised. Dad has lots of big clients. Remember when that cereal company sent us a whole case of new flavors before they hit the stores? Yeah, Darius said thoughtfully. But this feels different. Did you see how that manager's face changed when Dad mentioned who he was? Darnell nodded. It shouldn't take being the son of a CEO to be treated fairly. I know. Darius agreed quietly. Back in his office in downtown Atlanta, Marcus Johnson ended the call with his sons and sat back in his chair, his jaw tight with controlled anger. His executive assistant Amy stood in the doorway, concern evident on her face. Everything okay with the boys? She asked. Marcus shook his head. No, it's not. They were denied boarding on their flight while white kids their age were allowed. I need to cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. Amy nodded, already typing on her tablet. Consider it done. Anything else you need? Yes. Get me everything we have on our contract with Pacific Airways, and see if Linda in legal can join me for lunch. On it, Amy replied, disappearing from the doorway. Marcus turned to his computer and began typing an email to his leadership team. The subject line read, Emergency Meeting, 4 p.m. today. As CEO of Skyline Media, he controlled a $50 million advertising account with Pacific Airways. By that evening, he would make a decision that would send shockwaves through the airline industry. While Marcus prepared for his meeting, the twins settled into the comfortable lounge. Lisa returned with their drinks and a plate of cookies. Your next flight is confirmed for 2:15 p.m., she told them. First class, seats 2A and 2B. I'll come get you when it's time to board. Thank you, the boys said together. After she left, Darnell pulled out his phone to call their grandmother. Hi, Grandma. We got delayed, but we're taking a later flight. What happened, sweetheart? Elaine asked. Darnell explained the situation while Darius listened, occasionally adding details his brother missed. Their grandmother, a retired civil rights attorney, listened carefully. I see, she said when they finished. Her voice was calm, but the twins could hear the edge of anger in it. Well, I'm sorry that happened to you boys. I'll be waiting at the airport no matter what time you arrive. Thanks, Grandma, Darnell said. And Darnell, Darius, she added. Remember what I always tell you? Document everything, they recited, together a lesson she had taught them years ago. That's right. Write down exactly what happened while it's fresh in your minds. Names, times, what was said, everything. After ending the call, the twins did as their grandmother suggested, using the Notes app on their phones to record all the details of their experience. They worked quietly, each focused on capturing the events from their own perspective. Across town, Marcus Johnson sat at the head of a long conference table. His leadership team and the head of the legal department listened intently as he outlined what had happened to his sons. I've been on the phone with Pacific Airways CEO, Marcus explained. While she apologized and promised an investigation, I'm not convinced they understand the severity of this situation. They initially tried to downplay it as a misunderstanding, rather than acknowledging the clear discrimination that occurred. Linda. Chen, the company's chief legal counsel, spoke up. What are you thinking, Marcus? I'm thinking it's time to reevaluate our relationship with Pacific Airways, he replied. I'm not willing to spend millions promoting a company that treats children, my children, differently based on the color of their skin. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Pacific Airways was one of their largest accounts. Pulling their business would not only hurt the airline but would also impact Skyline Media's bottom line. I understand this is a business decision that affects all of us, Marcus continued, looking around the table. But some principles are more important than profits. I'd like to hear your thoughts. One by one, his team voiced their support. Some suggested alternatives to completely cutting ties, such as demanding changes to the airline's training and policies, while others agreed that a strong message needed to be sent. By the end of the meeting, the decision was made. Skyline Media would suspend all advertising work for Pacific Airways effective immediately, pending significant changes within the airline. Marcus would inform Patricia Miller himself. The first-class cabin of the afternoon flight to Chicago felt like a different world to Darnell and Darius. The wide leather seats reclined fully, and the flight attendant, a friendly woman named Maya, treated them with exceptional care. Can I get you boys anything before takeoff? Maya asked, smiling warmly. Apple juice, please, Darius replied. Same for me, Darnell added. As Maya moved away to get their drinks, Darnell leaned toward his brother. Do you think Dad really pulled the airline's advertising? Darius shrugged. If he said he would, then he probably did. Dad doesn't make empty threats. Their father had called just before they boarded, his voice tired but determined. He had told them he was proud of how they handled themselves and mentioned that he had taken care of things with the airline. The twins knew their father well enough to understand that meant serious action had been taken. The plane took off smoothly, climbing above the clouds. Despite the comfortable seats and special treatment, both boys remained quiet, processing the events of the day. They had experienced unfair treatment before, suspicious glances in stores, teachers who seemed to grade them more harshly than their white classmates, but never something this blatant, with such immediate consequences. "I keep thinking about those other kids," Darius said softly. "How they just walked right on the plane without anyone questioning them." Darnell nodded. "And how fast everything changed when Dad mentioned who he was." "Not everyone has a dad who runs a big company," Darius pointed out. "What happens to kids who don't?" Darnell had no answer for that. When they landed in Chicago, their grandmother was waiting at the gate. Elaine Johnson stood tall despite her 70 years, her silver hair cropped short, her eyes sharp behind stylish glasses. She wrapped each boy in a tight hug. "There are my handsome grandsons," she said, studying their faces. "Are you two okay?" "We're fine, Grandma," Darnell assured her, though his usual confident smile was missing. "They put us in first class," Darius added. Elaine raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's the least they could do." She took each boy by the shoulder. "Come on, let's get your bags and head home. We have a lot to talk about." Elaine's house in the Hyde Park neighborhood was a warm, welcoming place filled with books, artwork, and photographs documenting her family's history and her long career fighting for civil rights. The twins had always loved visiting, especially sitting on the back porch as their grandmother told stories about her cases and the changes she had helped create. After dinner that evening, they sat in the living room, notebooks open, as Elaine reviewed the details they had written down about the incident at the airport. "You boys did exactly the right thing," she told them, adjusting her reading glasses. "Documentation is power. It turns, he said, she said, into evidence." "Dad said he pulled the airline's advertising," Darnell mentioned. Elaine nodded thoughtfully. "Your father has always believed in using his position to create change. That's good, but it's only the beginning." "What do you mean?" Darius asked. "Individual actions matter," Elaine explained. "Your father making the airline face consequences matters. But real change happens when these individual incidents lead to systemic change, when policies and practices are transformed so this doesn't happen to anyone else." The twins' phones buzzed simultaneously with a message from their father. It was a link to a business news article. The headline read, "Skyline Media suspends $50 million advertising contract with Pacific Airways." "Wow," Darnell whispered, scanning the article. "It says Pacific Airways stock dropped 8% after the announcement." "Money talks," Elaine said simply. "When discrimination hurts the bottom line, companies suddenly become very interested in fixing the problem." The article mentioned that Skyline Media CEO Marcus Johnson had cited irreconcilable differences in values as the reason for suspending the contract, but gave no specific details about the incident. The airline had issued a brief statement saying they were working to resolve the situation and reaffirming their commitment to equality and fair treatment of all passengers. Back in Atlanta, Marcus Johnson sat in his home office, phone in hand. He had just finished another call with Patricia Miller, the CEO of Pacific Airways. Unlike their first conversation, where she had been defensive and dismissive, this time she had been desperate to find a solution. "Marcus, please," Patricia had pleaded. "We can work this out. What happened to your sons was inexcusable, but it was the actions of one employee, not a reflection of our company values." "It wasn't just one employee," Marcus had pointed out calmly. "It was the gate agent, her supervisor, and a system that allowed them to make decisions based on how my sons look rather than your actual policies. That suggests a culture problem, Patricia, not an individual one. Tell me what you want." She had asked. "Additional training? A review of our policies? We're willing to do whatever it takes." "I want meaningful change," Marcus had replied. "Not window dressing. I'll have my team draw up a proposal outlining what that looks like. Until then, our decision stands." Now, as he ended the call, Marcus leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, His wife, Nicole, appeared in the doorway. "How are the boys?" she asked, coming to sit on the arm of his chair. "They're settled in at Mom's place," Marcus answered. "They seem okay, but I know this hit them hard." Nicole nodded, her expression a mixture of anger and sadness. "They shouldn't have to deal with this, not in 2025, not ever." "No, they shouldn't," Marcus agreed. "But they handled it with dignity. And now we have a chance to make sure it doesn't happen to other kids." "Patricia finally taking it seriously?" Nicole asked. "Now that it's costing them millions?" "Oh yes, suddenly it's her top priority." Marcus couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "Use that," Nicole advised. "Make them set the standard for the industry." The next morning in Chicago, the twins joined their grandmother for breakfast. Elaine had made her famous blueberry pancakes, a tradition whenever they visited. As they ate, Darnell's phone buzzed with notifications. "Dad's on the news," he said, surprised. He turned his phone to show them a video clip from a morning business. Program on screen, Marcus sat across from the host, his expression serious. "This isn't just about my sons," he was saying. "It's about every child who doesn't have a parent with the resources to fight back. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable, and companies need to be held accountable when it happens on their watch." The host looked uncomfortable. "But wouldn't you agree that this could have been a simple misunderstanding? A one-time error in judgment?" Marcus shook his head. "When my sons watched as white children their same age boarded without question, it stopped being a misunderstanding. And frankly, that's part of the problem. The constant minimizing of these experiences, the refusal to call discrimination what it is." Elaine nodded approvingly as she watched. "Your father isn't pulling any punches." The news segment continued, showing statements from the airline and reactions from other business leaders. Some praised Marcus for taking a stand, while others suggested he was overreacting. The hashtag #DarJohnson Twins had started trending nationwide. "You two are famous," Elaine remarked, though her tone made it clear she didn't see this as a good thing. Darius, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "I don't want to be famous, I just wanted to visit Grandma without being treated like we don't belong." Elaine reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I know, sweetheart. But sometimes life hands you a moment that's bigger than what you wanted or expected. The question is, what do you do with that moment?" The twins looked at each other, uncertain. They hadn't asked for this spotlight, they hadn't wanted their spring break trip to become national news. But here they were. "What should we do?" Darnell asked his grandmother. Elaine considered the question carefully. "That's for you to decide. But remember what I've always told you. In this world you'll face moments of injustice. You can let them define you, or you can use them to define the future for others." By the third day of their visit to Chicago, Darnell and Darius could no longer ignore the growing attention their story was receiving. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages from friends who had seen the news. Classmates sent screenshots of social media posts with the trending hashtag #DarJohnson Twins. Even their teachers had emailed to check if they were okay. "This is getting crazy," Darnell said as they sat on their grandmother's back porch. The spring air was cool but pleasant, with birds chirping in the old oak tree that dominated the small yard. Darius nodded, scrolling through his phone. "Look at this. Someone started an online petition for people to boycott Pacific Airways. It already has over 50,000 signatures." Their grandmother brought out a tray with glasses of lemonade and placed it on the small table between them. "How are you boys feeling about all of this attention?" she asked, settling into her favorite wicker chair. The twins exchanged glances. It was Darius who answered first. "It's weird. We didn't do anything special, we just tried to get on a plane." "That's exactly the point," Elaine said gently. "You didn't do anything special. You were just living your lives, and yet you were treated differently. That's why people are responding so strongly, because your experience reveals a truth many want to ignore." Darnell took a sip of his lemonade. "Dad called earlier. He said reporters want to interview us." Elaine raised her eyebrows. "And what did he say about that?" "He said it's up to us," Darnell replied. "But that we don't have to do anything we don't want to." Your father is right, Elaine agreed. This is your story to tell, or not tell, as you choose. What would you do, Grandma? Darius asked. Elaine was quiet for a moment, looking out at her garden where spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. When I was a young lawyer, I learned that stories have power. They can change minds in ways that facts and statistics never will. But sharing your story comes with a cost. Once it's out there, it doesn't belong just to you anymore. The twins considered her words carefully. Their spring break was supposed to be fun and relaxing. Instead, they found themselves at the center of a national conversation about discrimination. I think we should do it, Darnell said finally, looking at his brother. If it helps make sure this doesn't happen to someone else, isn't that worth it? Darius was less certain. Always more reserved than his twin, he didn't like the idea of cameras and strangers asking questions. But he also understood what was at stake. Okay, he agreed quietly, but just one interview. Together. Their father arranged for a respected journalist named Alicia Rivera to come to their grandmother's house the next day. Alicia had a reputation for handling sensitive stories with care, particularly those involving young people. When she arrived, the twins were nervous, but prepared. Their grandmother had helped them practice what they wanted to say, reminding them that they didn't have to answer any question that made them uncomfortable. Alicia sat up in Elaine's living room, with the twins sitting together on the sofa. After checking that they were ready, she began recording. I'm here with Darnell and Darius Johnson, the 14-year-old twins whose experience at Atlanta International Airport has sparked a national conversation about discrimination, Alicia began. Boys, can you tell me in your own words what happened that day? Taking turns, the twins recounted their experience. How they had been denied boarding despite having valid tickets, how they had watched as white teenagers were allowed on the plane without question, and how everything changed once their father got involved. What was going through your mind when you realized you were being treated differently? Alicia asked. Darius, usually the quieter of the two, found his voice. It wasn't the first time something like this happened to us, but it was the first time it was so obvious. There was no other explanation. We had tickets. We met the age requirements. The only reason they stopped us was because of how we look. And how did that make you feel? Angry, Darnell admitted, but also sad. Like no matter what we do, some people will only ever see one thing about us. Alicia nodded, then asked, Your father's response has been in the news, pulling a major advertising contract from the airline. How do you feel about that? The twins glanced at each other before Darnell answered. Our dad always taught us to stand up for what's right. He's just doing what he's always told us to do. But not everyone has a dad who can do that, Darius added softly. Not everyone can make a big company listen. When the interview was over and Alicia had packed up her equipment, she thanked the family for their time. This story matters, she told them. I promise to tell it honestly. The interview aired the following evening on a major news network. The twins watched it with their grandmother, feeling strange at seeing themselves on television. The segment was straightforward and powerful, letting their words carry the story without sensationalism. What they didn't expect was the flood of responses that followed. People from across the country began sharing their own stories of discrimination using the hashtag #JustLikeTheJohnson Twins. Former employees of Pacific Airways came forward with accounts of problematic practices they had witnessed or been asked to enforce. One former flight attendant revealed in an online post that there had been an unwritten policy to apply extra scrutiny to young black male passengers traveling alone. Her post was shared thousands of times, forcing the airline to respond. Pacific Airways issued a statement denying any official or unofficial discriminatory policies. They announced they had fired the gate agent involved in the twins incident and placed the supervisor on administrative leave pending further investigation. They also promised to conduct a thorough review of their practices and provide additional training to all customer-facing staff. But for many observers, these steps seemed too little, too late. Competitors seized the opportunity with one airline releasing an advertisement specifically highlighting their inclusive policies for young travelers. The campaign featured diverse teenagers traveling alone, with the tagline, "Everyone deserves to fly." Back in Atlanta, Marcus Johnson was preparing for a meeting that could change the industry. After days of negotiations, Patricia Miller had agreed to meet with him in person to discuss conditions for restoring their business relationship. "Are you sure about this?" Nicole asked as she helped her husband select a tie for the meeting. "You're asking for a lot." "I'm asking for what should already be standard practice," Marcus replied firmly. "And yes, I'm sure. This isn't just about Darnell and Darius anymore. Have you seen how many people have come forward with similar experiences?" Nicole nodded. "It's heartbreaking and infuriating. Which is why this moment matters," Marcus said. "We have leverage now, and we need to use it." The meeting was set to take place at Skyline Media's headquarters, a symbolic choice that made it clear who held the power in this new dynamic. Marcus had invited civil rights leaders and diversity experts to join the discussion, ensuring that the solutions would address the real problems, not just the public relations disaster. In Chicago, the twins were preparing to return home. There, spring break had been nothing like they expected, but as they packed their bags, they found themselves talking about the future rather than dwelling on what had happened. "Grandma says we should start a blog," Darnell told his brother, "about our experiences and stuff." Darius looked skeptical. "I don't know. I'm not really a writer." "You don't have to be. I could do most of the writing and you could do the pictures and videos. You're good at that." "Maybe," Darius said, considering the idea. "What would we even call it?" Darnell grinned. "How about Twin Perspectives?" For the first time in days, Darius laughed. It felt good to think about creating something positive from all that had happened. As they finished packing, their phones buzzed with a message from their father. It was a photo of him sitting across a conference table from a woman they recognized as Patricia Miller, the CEO of Pacific Airways. The Yao message read, "Making change happen. See you boys tomorrow. Love you both." "Do you think anything will really change?" Darius asked, looking at the photo. Darnell thought about everything that had happened since that morning at the airport, how their personal experience had sparked a nationwide conversation, how others had found the courage to share their stories, how powerful companies were being forced to examine their practices. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think it will. Maybe not all at once, but change is already happening." 6 weeks had passed since that morning at Atlanta International Airport. The twins sat in the backseat of their father's car as he drove them to a downtown hotel. Today was the day of the press conference, and despite their new familiarity with attention, both boys felt nervous. "Remember, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to," Marcus told them, catching their eyes in the rearview mirror. "Your presence is enough." "We know, Dad," Darnell said. He wore a navy blue suit that matched his brother's, both of them looking older than their 14 years. "Are you nervous?" Darius asked his father. Marcus smiled slightly. "A little. This is a big moment." It had taken weeks of negotiations, countless meetings, and the combined pressure of public opinion and financial consequences to reach this point. Today, Marcus Johnson and Patricia Miller would stand together to announce the changes Pacific Airways had agreed to implement, changes that would set a new standard for the entire airline industry. The hotel's conference room was packed with reporters and cameras when they arrived. Marcus led his sons to seats in the front row where Nicole was already waiting. She squeezed each boy's hand as they sat down. "Proud of you," she whispered. At exactly noon, Patricia Miller walked onto the small stage and approached the podium. The room quieted immediately. "Good afternoon," she began. 6 weeks ago, an incident occurred at Atlanta International Airport that revealed serious flaws in our company's practices and culture. 2 young passengers, Darnell and Darius Johnson, were denied boarding on one of our flights despite having valid tickets and meeting all requirements, while other passengers of the same age were allowed to board. She paused, looking directly at the twins. "Today I want to publicly apologize to Darnell and Darius and to their parents, Marcus and Nicole Johnson. What happened to you was wrong, and it reflects failures in our system that we are committed to addressing. Patricia then outlined the immediate actions the airline had taken. The gate agent had been terminated, the supervisor had been demoted, and several executives who had initially downplayed the incident had been asked to resign. But individual accountability, while necessary, is not enough, she continued. Today I'm joined by Marcus Johnson, CEO of Skyline Media, to announce a series of substantive changes that Pacific Airways will implement immediately. Marcus rose and joined Patricia at the podium. The sight of the two CEOs standing together, one black, one white, created a powerful image that would appear on news websites around the country within minutes. "Thank you, Patricia," Marcus said. "What began as a deeply painful experience for my sons has evolved into an opportunity for meaningful change." After extensive discussions with Pacific Airways, civil rights leaders, and diversity experts, we've developed a comprehensive plan that addresses not just the specific incident involving my sons, but the underlying issues that made it possible. Marcus outlined the changes, speaking clearly and confidently. First, Pacific Airways would completely overhaul their unaccompanied minor policy, creating clear, consistent guidelines that would be applied equally to all young travelers. These guidelines would be publicly available and provided in writing to all passengers booking tickets for minors. Second, the airline would establish a $5 million scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in aviation, from pilots to engineers to executives. The goal was to increase diversity throughout the industry, particularly in leadership positions. Third, Pacific Airways would create an independent diversity oversight committee with real authority to audit practices, review complaints, and implement improvements. This committee would include civil rights leaders, industry experts, and regular travelers from diverse backgrounds. Fourth, the airline would implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees, with special emphasis on customer-facing staff. This training would be developed by experts and would address both conscious and unconscious bias. Finally, and perhaps most significantly, Pacific Airways would share these new practices with other airlines, working to establish industry-wide standards for fair and equal treatment of all passengers. These changes represent not just a response to a single incident, Marcus concluded, but a commitment to fundamental transformation. Skyline Media will be resuming our business relationship with Pacific Airways, and we'll be working together on a new advertising campaign centered around inclusion and respect in travel. After the formal announcements, reporters asked questions. One directed a question to the twins. "Darnell and Darius, how do you feel about all these changes coming from what happened to you?" The brothers looked at each other. They hadn't planned to speak, but Darnell stood up. After a moment, Darius joined him. "It was never just about us," Darnell said into the microphone his father handed him. "It was about everyone who's ever been treated differently because of how they look." Darius, typically the quieter twin, added, "We hope these changes mean other kids won't have to go through what we did." Their simple, honest words resonated more deeply than all the corporate promises and policy announcements. By that evening, their statement was being shared widely online, with many commenting on the maturity and grace of the 14-year-old boys. After the press conference, the family went to dinner to celebrate. As they waited for their food, Nicole raised her water glass in a toast. "To my amazing sons," she said, "who handled an unfair situation with dignity and helped create real change." "And to your father," Elaine added, having flown in from Chicago for the occasion, "who used his position to make sure that change happened." The twins smiled, a little embarrassed by the attention. But they also felt a new sense of pride. What had begun as a humiliating rejection had become something powerful and positive. 2 months later, Darnell and Darius sat in their room, finishing their first blog post for Twin Perspectives. Their website had launched the previous week, featuring their story along with resources for young people facing discrimination. "What do you think?" Darnell asked, turning his laptop so his brother could read the final paragraph. Darius read it carefully before nodding. "It's good, real." The post ended with words they had carefully crafted together. Change doesn't always happen all at once. Sometimes it starts with one person saying, "This isn't right." Sometimes it starts with documenting what happened to you. And sometimes it starts with a phone call that sets bigger things in motion. Our story isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning. They hit publish together, sending their words out into the world. Downstairs, Marcus sat in his home office, reviewing the final cut of the new Pacific Airways commercial. It featured travelers of all ages, races, and backgrounds, moving through airports with dignity and respect. In one brief scene, two young black boys boarded a plane with confidence, their boarding passes accepted without question. The commercial would debut during a major sporting event the following weekend, seen by millions. But beyond the advertising campaign, real changes were already visible. Pacific Airways had implemented their new unaccompanied minor policy, with clear guidelines posted at every gate. The first scholarships from the fund had been awarded to promising students from underrepresented communities, and the Diversity Oversight Committee had begun its work, with quarterly reports to be made public. Other airlines had taken notice, with several announcing reviews of their own policies. What had happened to the Johnson twins had become a catalyst for industry-wide reflection and reform. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Darius asked a question that had been on his mind. "Dad, do you think things will really change for good? Or will people just forget about all this in a few months?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Some things have already changed," he said. "Policies, practices, public awareness. But lasting change takes time and constant effort. That's why what you boys are doing with your blog matters. It keeps the conversation going." "Your father's right," Elaine added. "I've been fighting for change for over 50 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that progress isn't a straight line. But every step forward matters, even when there are steps back." Darnell and Darius nodded, taking in their grandmother's wisdom. They were just 14, with their lives stretching before them, but they had already learned something powerful about standing up for themselves, using their voices, and creating change that reached far beyond their own experience. As they continued eating dinner, talking and laughing together, they were simply a family again, not symbols or hashtags or news stories. And that perhaps was the most important victory of all, the right to be treated with dignity and to live their lives on their own terms.